Okay, we're live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest, a returning guest. His name is Paul Gosselin, and we spoke back in June of 2021 about his two-part book. We talked about the first part, and the title of the book is Flight from the Absolute, Cynical Observations on the Postmodern West. So today, we're going to talk about Volume 2, very interesting add-on to his original book. This book talks more about kind of critiques evolutionary thought and compares this kind of thought to what's happened in the 20th century with horrible events like the Gulag Archipelago, Solzhenitsyn, and the Holocaust and the Final Solution. But Paul could talk more about that. So, Paul Gosselin, are you there?
Hello there. The first chapter of this volume 2 does get into some of the ethical issues that are derivative of the postmodern worldview, but the rest of the book gets into the issue of the theory of evolution, and I start off looking at this from the social anthropologist's point of view, as that is basically humans all over the world. I'll ask the big questions. Where do we come from? What are we doing here? How do we deal with this crazy world? How do we sort this out? And that's how these are the questions that worldviews attempt to answer. And worldviews can be, the traditional religions that have gods or goddesses or whatever. And they can also be materialistic ideologies that do not refer to any supernatural phenomenon or anything of that sort, but they attempt to sort out. So these are ideologies that are derivative from the Enlightenment and more recently postmodernism. So basically humans are all stuck with these questions, and if somebody is working within a materialistic worldview, then you still need an origins myth to provide answers to the questions, where do we come from? Because the answer to the question, where do we come from, will affect everything else that you build on that. So,
Right.
These are very critical questions, and they will have influence about how you treat your next door neighbor, or how you deal with life, and how you deal with relationships, and many how you build up a system of law.
Right.
If you recognize people with rights or not, or if you determine if your ideology determines that certain people don't get rights. So these are very, very critical issues.
And I think that your book talks kind of like the Enlightenment brought in science, right?
Well, the thing is, I have to make this a little bit more precise. Is that in my view, the Enlightenment should be looked at as primarily a ideological religious movement. In other words, it's basically trying to form worldviews. So you have a number of ideologies that are derivative from the Enlightenment. You have Nazism, communism, Marxism, just the Marxist theories and things of that sort. And there's all kinds of other stuff you can put in there, but they're all attempting to, they're building on the Enlightenment's view. That one of the central questions also that religions attempt to answer is, where is truth? So when you're building a worldview, well, you have to have some sort of authoritative basis for doing so. Otherwise it's just everybody else's opinion, and you can't build a society, you can't build a civilization on that basis. So the Enlightenment was basically an alternative, or was competing with the Judeo-Christian worldview. And so the answer to that question from the Enlightenment's point of view is, okay, science and human reason is the most authoritative discourse. So that's where you find truth. So that's and this, of course, leads us to the inevitably when they're answering attempting to provide an origins myth, well, they need a materialistic origins myth. So this is where you bring in science as an answer. And I have an interesting quote here from Richard Dawkins.
Okay.
So in the first stage of the Enlightenment, there really wasn't a materialistic response to Genesis. So there were people prior to Darwin and prior to guys like the French. Anyways, there were other people that had made attempts to make materialistic origins myths before Darwin, and so Richard Dawkins makes this comment in The Blind Watchmaker. He says, an atheist before Darwin could have said, following David Hume, I have no explanation for complex biological design. All I know is God isn't a good explanation. So you must wait and see and hope somebody comes up with a better one. I can't help feeling that such a position, though logically sound, would have left one feeling pretty unsatisfied. And although atheism might have been logically tenable before Darwin, Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. So
Right.
I would correct or paraphrase that last sentence that Dawkins says and change it rather to Darwin made it possible to be an ideologically fulfilled atheist. In other words, having a satisfying or plausible answer to the question, how do you get the complexity of life that we see all around us without an intelligent agent? So that's what Darwin and people like Buffon, they call him the Buffon, were attempting to do and provide this answer. So this is what Dawkins is talking about is actually not a scientific issue. It's an ideological issue. It's finding an answer to the question, where do we come from?
Right.
And I would claim that this is the theory of evolution's primary function. This is not something that is secondary. This is what Dawkins here is talking about, but this is the primary function is actually ideological. So this is really central to what I'm talking about in this book. And I provide material from social anthropology and a lot of material from that. But a little bit later on, I get into a secondary question, which is part of the picture, which is used to defend the theory of evolution. Well, it's science. So science, you can't, the way people in the Enlightenment thinkers, they typically trot this out to shield evolution from any critiques, any serious criticism.
Well, sorry to interrupt, Paul, but they're using it today for the basis of these mRNA injections too. Trust the science. So it's the same. You see the same approach. Don't question. We've got the science. They don't want any more questions than that. Sorry to interrupt, but the similarities
that's exactly this. You're right. It's exactly the same sort of argument. You're a science. So right off the bat, if you're shielding ideology with in the name of science. So if you reject evolution or Darwin, you're a science denier. If you reject the vaccine or any of the COVID measures that are going down, well, you're a science denier. So that's a very effective way to shut people down,
yes.
To shut down, to cut out any serious questions and criticism.
Even the slightest one, Paul. Even the slightest criticism.
Of course. This leads us to actually to Karl Popper, though, because Karl Popper was practically the most influential philosopher of science during the 20th century. He wrote many books, and So
Can
one
you
of the
talk about?
things,
I mean, we can bounce back, but I think Popper is very important. We talked about him in the pre-show. For people probably haven't heard of Karl Popper, can you kind of explain how his works and his varying works were critical of evolutionary thought?
well, he, first off, the evolution was the theory of evolution was an incidental target of Karl Popper. In other words, his critiques weren't central to his works. Karl Popper was basically reacting to the way science had been abused, for example, by the Nazis or by the communists, and supporting. So Karl Popper wanted a whittled down definition of science. So he was restricting science to what he called, and it refers to the title of one of his books, Conjectures and Refutations. So basically, Popper's view was that science inherently involves, in other words, it's a requirement that if you're proposing a scientific hypothesis, then you have to formulate it in a form where it can be subjected to tests. It can be refuted. In other words, you never can. His view is that science cannot lead to truth. It can lead. It's always tentative. It's never absolute. Like compare, let's say, the Bible or something in that form. And here's the thing: when it came a little bit incidentally, he was bumping into the issue of evolution, and his view was that, well, no, evolution does not satisfy my criteria for a scientific theory, because there's never any form where it is stated where it could be tested and refuted. In other words, it has to be formulated in a way that you can reject it. But evolutionists are very, very effective in explaining away any refutation. For example, the evolutionists in Darwin's time, they would look through a microscope and they would see a single-celled organism, a bacteria, whatever, and they would chortle, "Oh, this is just a simple cell." That would be the typical way to look at it, the simple cell. But now when we look at a simple cell with all the experience we were developing microbiology, we've been looking at them a lot more closely, and we see the humongously incredible complexity of just a simple cell. And think about it, compared to one of our top of the line supercomputers that are able to do petaflops of calculations per second, and which are pretty much the top of human intellectual capacity right now. It's the summit of science and technology, what we have right now. But you take one of these supercomputers, and a simple cell can beat them anytime, because a simple cell is capable of creating an operating and functional copy of itself with no other help from outside. Just using its own internal programming, the simple cell is able to do that.
Hyper complex. And if you look at his drawings of cells, Darwin's drawings of cells, they were rudimentary. He had a very simple understanding back in the 19th century. But also Popper juxtaposed the so-called law of evolution with the law of gravity. So you could say the law of gravity is provable by anybody, but the so-called law of evolution is not. So I'm just adding to that.
Well, here's the thing, though. When Popper was looking at, he had certain objections to natural selection and things of that sort. But the main issue that Popper had is that the whole matter of origins is outside what science can. You can't do any experiments on the origin of the species or the origin of birds or bacteria or whatever. there isn't any scientific. We have, for example, if you want to look at something very small, you have a microscope. You want to look at something very far away, you use a telescope, and et cetera, et cetera. You want to use you need something to explore inside the human body. Well, you have MRI scanners, but there is no technical means to explore the first events. These are unique events. Science has to do with repeatable events. For example, gravity. I can get my car keys out of my pocket and I can drop them on the floor and I can have this filmed, and we can observe the acceleration, and you can take your own car keys out of your pocket and you can repeat my experiment, and you can see if I'm spouting nonsense about the acceleration of my car keys, or you can confirm, yeah, they do accelerate at that speed. And we can do the same for water boiling in a pot on our stove. Verify water boils at 100 degrees centigrade. So this is observable science, but what Popper was slowly whittling away at was the Enlightenment concept that science can be used as an answer for everything.
Right.
So this guy, of course, when creationists and critics of evolution began quoting Popper on this, this began to there was pressure put on Popper to shut up, or to perhaps make some statements,
Right, fall in line or something.
Yes. So just to show that he was playing by the rules and everything. Right. So I have a chapter. I'm not going to give away all the details in that chapter, but basically there was an article that Popper finally published. Supposedly, the consensus is that Popper recanted his views, his critiques of evolution. So he decided to play by the rules and be a good boy, and but I present detailed evidence that contradicts the consensus view about what Popper really felt about evolution, and whether he quote unquote recanted his views. So.
Right. But he called it kind of a religious view. It was a metaphysical research program, right? So his view was to forward a metaphysical worldview, and it's a theme in your book. There's origins or myths that we all rely upon to kind of operate, and like you say, it affects everything, our full worldview, whether you're just a pure materialist or else.
Here, while I won't cover all the details about that article that Popper published where he supposedly recanted, but here's a little tidbit from prestigious science journal editor, a guy by the name of Adam Wilkins, and he was editor of the prestigious journal The Bioessays. So here's a little tidbit that gives a little insight to the actual scientific contribution that the theory of evolution has provided. Because if you go in university libraries and you check out the number of books that have the word evolution in them, well, you'll have humongous, shelves and shelves of books with this with that mention evolution. It's just sort of like a byword. It's but here's the quote from Wilkins. You see, this was written in 2000, over 20 years ago now. The subject of evolution occupies a special and paradoxical place within the biology as a whole. While the great majority of biologists would probably agree with Theodis Dobzhansky's dictum that nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. Right. Most can't. Okay, that's the end of quote. So most can conduct their work quite happily without particular reference to evolutionary ideas. So evolution would appear to be an indispensable unifying idea, and at the same time, a highly superfluous one. So
no, it's incredible.
This is rather shocking because the scientific productivity of evolution is, well, I'm putting this in a nutshell. I'm not. These aren't Wilkins' words, but basically he's saying that its scientific productivity or fruitfulness is zero. So the reason why so many people quote have the word evolution, especially biologists, why they constantly have this, is more for ideological reasons, more for just showing that they're part of the pack, that they adopt the dominant worldview. But the actual contribution, if you compare this evolution, for example, to Newton's classical physics, well, Newton's classical physics allows us to put satellites in orbit, and well, relativity comes into this too, of course. But you know, the Newton's classical physics allowed us to get men to the moon and also bring them back, which is usually considered a good idea. So there are real, there's real fruit that comes from real science that is based on real observation. And one of the sidelines of evolutionary theories is you may run into sometimes is what they call order from noise. And the order from noise concept is that if you have it's related to the question, how do you get order? How do you get information or the programming? Well, we have to face, for example, the whole issue that there's programming or living organisms. There's all kinds of programming for all kinds of, there's mechanisms and things of this sort. So how do you get that? So one of the proposed solutions is order from noise. You just have enough time. Time is the magic wand, of course. Lots and lots of time, and eventually you'll get order. It's it's viewed like like the tooth fairy. The tooth fairy will come and do her thing, and so it's time is viewed as sort of like a magic wand that will bring about any desired result.
Right, but, it really is incredible.
But here's the thing: if this really worked, okay, if the order from noise principle, which you see in very high flung theoretical evolutionary biology journals, you'll have this in very the elite evolutionary journals. They'll be talking about stuff like there were some French biologists too that were putting this out. But here's the thing: if it was actually something that could produce real results, well, you would think that, for example, Bill Gates would fire all his programmers at Microsoft and use this principle to develop the next version of Windows. You get order from noise. Well, if it works, then why not use it to get some practical results? But I don't think that programmers at Microsoft have to worry too much that that they can get actually programs without programmers. Which
right.
But the whole theory of evolution in its modern version rests on this idea that you get programming without a programmer. So.
But I mean, it's incredible how they really have taken over science with the theory that has so much cultural impact, but the science of it, the actual real science that they claim, isn't provable. It's not. You can't objectively prove it, just like Popper said.
Yeah.
It's really incredible. I mean, and one of the other interesting elements of your book is like the consequences of this ideas upon man as animal in the animal kingdom. Can you talk about kind of this, how the Judeo-Christian view is that man in the animal kingdom is different. In the Darwin view, you can learn about man from the animals, right? Which was very kind of new thinking, and really started after Darwin, right?
Yeah. That is entirely true. Well, because when you throw out the creator, you're also throwing out the lawmaker, the one that makes the rules. So you basically, for example, when I was in university, still doing my social anthropology studies, often we would have in classes where there was certain discussions about human sexuality. You would have authors throwing out things like, well, we see certain organisms like I don't know, the penguins, or certain penguins put up with homosexual activity, and since we're animals, then
Right.
logically this defends. Then this is a good justification for we're just animals after all, so why not put up with humans homosexuality? So, but here's the thing though, if you open this door, then you're stuck with following it logically to its consequences. And for example, one of the issues that comes up, well, okay, there's all kinds of very strange behavior in animals. If that's your only line of moral thinking, well, then, for example, in polar bears, when the males come out of hibernation and they run into their offspring that the mother is not paying too much attention, where the male polar bears can cannibalize the small polar bears if they're needing they're needing a
Right.
snack or something. So there's all kinds of behavior that we can run into in the animal world, and if we're only cut and paste, we're just pick and choose which ones are useful to our present ideological needs. But the whole, just opening up that principle, you can take it anywhere.
Right. Well, you could go
It's
if there's
arbitrary.
right. If we're mans and they're animals, you mentioned you could be bestiality. What does it matter? Transspecies sexuality, all kinds of strange things. If we're all animals, and then if we're animals, then you can be treated completely different, right? So any kind of
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, the other significant issue is that in the Judeo-Christian tradition, man is viewed as unique. Man is seen as made in God's image. So man has value for that reason, not because he has a PhD, not because he has $1 billion in the bank, not because he can beat your face to a pulp, because he's got biceps like Arnold, or what Arnold used to have anyways. So each human is seen as having value for that reason, and requiring respect for that reason as well. So this is the basis for our political rights and our
right,
religious freedom, or the free speech value, this free speech principles we have in the West were first won by people who were in the following the Reformation, that were defending their own religious freedom.
right,
So there were the early Reform people, beginning with the Lutherans, then later on others dissidents, were because the general form of religion in the West was previous to that was, well, the king is a Catholic or a Protestant, so everybody else has to be the same. So that would be the typical form, if it's also the typical form in Muslim nations too as well. So there's very little tolerance for any ideological or religious deviation within Islamic nations where Islam is dominant. So, but the reformers recognized that no, humans have to be free to follow their to make their own decisions personally, and so a number of them paid for this demand to break from the meddling of the state for religious matters. And this was the basis later on for the forming of political parties. People could have different political views, but this was initiated. The ground was broken because of people fighting for religious freedom.
Right. And then you could just juxtapose that. You mentioned Solzhenitsyn in the book and some of these other atheistic, materialistic places like the Soviet Union, where those values were not really valued. They weren't real values. The individual wasn't valued, and free speech wasn't valued, and the person is almost just like an animal. And also that whole, we can talk about the theme of scientism and science. I think Marx's presumption was that he was perfectly scientific. It was a scientific eventuality that the whole world would be communistic. So they had that certainty, and that justified incredible abuse.
Those two ideologies, both Marxism and Nazism, were both very Darwinian in their outlook. For example, both of them, at the heart of their ideology was this idea of survival of the fittest, whereas in the case of the Nazis, well, it was survival of the fittest of the Aryan race. So this was a racial view of survival of the fittest, and of course, the ones that were on the losing side had to be gotten rid of. And in the case of Marxism, though, it was survival of the fittest of the social classes. So you have the workers who are striving and who are fighting against the capitalists. So but basically at the heart of each of these ideologies was the Darwinian concept of survival of the fittest. And
right.
but both of them got rid of this central idea that, seeing they were distancing themselves from the Judeo-Christian worldview, they'd also gotten rid of this whole idea of the man made in God's image. So you have the famous quote by Lenin that, well, massacring a few millions was just like making omelets, no big deal. It's just the only thing that was important in his view was setting up the communist state.
Right. And even Stalin
at the communist paradise of the workers, the workers government.
Workers' utopia, right? Stalin famously said, one death is a tragedy, 1 million is a statistic.
Anything could be justified on that basis.
Right. So, and that's the Nazis too. And that's not just the Soviet Union. You can take that to Maoism.
Of course.
All the other places.
They're following the same logic. And but here's the thing: in our own time, with our postmodern elites who are presently in power, these people also do not recognize the concept that man is made in God's image. They don't. There's no accountability to any creator or any higher law above them. So where this translates, of course, is the whole either at the beginning of life with the whole issue of abortion, where kids are without value because we've determined that a child in the mother's womb is of no value. But the same ideology applies, for example, with euthanasia. When people are past a certain, we also have a determining what's quality of life. Well, this is basically people setting themselves up with godlike powers to determine where life is worth living only if it meets these criteria.
Right. And
that is basically what the Nazis were doing too. With the whole, of course they had a racial definition of, life, the meaningful life in their case, but still our postmodern elites are giving themselves godlike powers to determine, okay, past if you don't meet these requirements, then you can be discontinued.
Right, and you just see that coming around again. You see it coming through the Nazis and just the massive purges in Soviet Union to the present. This idea of euthanasia, that's really kind of taking over a lot of the world. I mean, I think euthanasia is legal in the Netherlands or Holland or something like that. But
and it's being set up in Canada. It's maybe it's but in Canada there's a lot of the medical institutions, the medical associations, the ones that runs the medical system. The ideology is powerfully being pushed through, and it's just it's being cranked up incrementally, though. That's the when the Nazis came into power, things were a little bit brutal and in your face. But we have the postmoderns have learned a few very critical lessons from the Nazi experience and the communists, is that when you're exposing your ideas openly, well, this will allow your enemies to organize and attack you. So the postmoderns are very behind the scenes. They're using government institutions. They're using educational institutions. They're not laying out their cards on the table. The Nazis, for example, had Hitler's Mein Kampf. So if you wanted to look at the Nazi program, you just had to read Mein Kampf, and you would have a pretty good idea where they were going. And the same with the communists. Well, if you wanted to know what the communists were what they were intending to do, well, you read the Communist Manifesto or Marx's writings. But the postmoderns have avoided all this. They've just pushed their ideology through. They don't lay their cards down on the table. So it's more difficult for their adversaries to organize, and it's harder to get a grasp on where things are going, where they're taking all the current events and everything.
Right, but I do see that the gist or the arc of your book ties into the present state, where you see these people who are making the laws of nature again, whether the science of this pandemic, and they're the scientistical leaders, their science is correct, and they're making massive changes. I mean, if you look at Australia, I think they had like 1 death a week from COVID, and they're shutting the whole country down for science. So, and you have strange things happening in Canada and the U.S. actually.
They seem to be attempting to bring a Chinese surveillance state into a democratic regime. So they seem well on the way to doing that. And
it's coming in the States.
It's pretty chilling. But Canada, my personal impression is Canada's just a few steps behind. We're not quite there, but presently, for example, not being vaccinated, I can't even visit my parents in an old folks home. Being vaccinated. So these are these are very, very practical, down to earth issues. It's not. I don't travel much, but so I'm already. Pretty soon I won't be able to take a plane and leave the country if I felt like it, or travel or whatever. So these are very practical issues.
Very practical issues coming from your book. And I mean, it's really so much information. There's tons of information on Popper. I would recommend people just read that section on Popper. So important. And also the kind of like what you have to do, the kind of struggle session to get through, some of these groups' ideas, because we're headed there individually, in my opinion, sooner than later. Paul, where's the best place? I know your website is samizdat.com, correct?
Right.
And then your book is the best place at your website, or is it Amazon?
Both are good. That's pretty much irrelevant. You can get it through Amazon. It's available there too as well, and a lot of other secondary resellers that rely on Amazon. So it's that's a good way to do it.
And you post often, don't you? Have a blog, or is it on your website where you're posting a lot your articles? Is that right?
Yeah. I regularly post to my website, Samizdat. I don't have that's basically my blog. You could say it's not it's more of a traditional website though, however. But
Is there anything you'd like to add, or anything I missed before we wrap it up?
Just one little parallel, one link between the book and the present circumstances is that regarding how science is being used, is that Popper was when Popper was talking about science, one of the essential elements for him was that science required debate, real serious debate. For example, if the present debate about either vaccines or the COVID restrictions or all this were conducted, if the same principles were the governments are applying right now to the debate about these issues was applied when, for example, Einstein was coming on the scene and bringing his theory of relativity to the fore. Well, if he had faced exactly the same attitudes about the consensus science is it, and we all have to submit to the consensus science. Well, Einstein would have never been able to get his theory get a hearing because the consensus in his time at the beginning of the 20th century was, well, Newton's classical physics are it. It's the consensus. So why fight the consensus? And but here's the thing: at that time, the scientists were up to taking on a real serious debate about fundamental issues, and this allowed Einstein to make his case and provide evidence and show that where there were areas where Newton's physics was not able to explain certain phenomena. And so people were open to this sort of debate. Whereas here in the present context, where the governments and medical authorities are saying everybody must bow to the science, the consensus says this, the experts say this. Well, that does not meet Karl Popper's requirement for science. No, so this would be anathema to Popper. You basically you need open debate to have any real science. And if you're denying that, if you're cutting that out, then you're not doing science. You're doing ideology, you're doing politics, but you're not doing science.
Right. That's so
this
important.
is really central right now to what's going down and the way the debate is being carried. Well, actually, there is if Google and the CDC were had power, absolute power, well, then there wouldn't be, everybody would be shut down.
Right. I mean, I know people have already been shut down for other issues, but that's a great way to wrap it up, Paul. So again, the author's name is Paul Gosselin. The title of the book, it's a 2-volume, is Flight from the Absolute, Cynical Observations on the Postmodern West. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
All right, take care, Paul.
Bye-bye.
All right, stay there.